So who owns the music rights of composers and performing artists, and what happens to those rights when they die? It's a question that is at the center of an ongoing legal battle between the family of the late music icon Miriam Makeba's descendants and a trust she established when she was alive to run her affairs. The Department of Arts and Culture has entered the fray on the side of the family members as part of their wider concern about the plight of many artists who are often exploited and die living in penury, whilst their works rake in millions for unscrupulous promoters and record companies. We are now joined by the Minister of Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, to discuss this. We'll also be looking at the issue of naming various centres around the country, including airports. Much to discuss with you this evening, Minister. Thank you for joining us. But firstly, let's start with the Makeba issue. Why has the Department of Arts and Culture stepped into this matter between this trust and the family?
Well, thanks Bongani and your viewers. Firstly, it's an important matter. It's an important matter because we view Mama Africa as the cultural heritage of South Africa. It's not just an individual, a private citizen. But we got closer to the situation because the late Brahu raised with me an issue about Mama Makeba and said that he's concerned because South Africa cannot celebrate her legacy. You have to go via a particular individual. So if something can be done, and I met the individual concerned, but nothing came out of that. Now, when the family decided to take the matter to the next level, which is the legal route, we decided that in the interest of Mama Makeba and in the interest of South Africans who by right should celebrate her without being hindered by any individual, we made a judgment call based on cultural promotion.
So as you understand it, what are the issues at play?
Well, the issue is simple, is that exclusive rights are claimed by individual, that whatever you want to do with Mama Makeba, you have to go via an individual. Now, as government, it's not only from the point of view of the family. Government will have to celebrate and encourage South Africans to celebrate these icons of the nation. Without anybody saying, no, but look, you can't do that, it's mine, and so on. So that's the main thing.
But with respect, is it not a lot more complicated than that? As I understand it, Siyandisa Music, which is owned by the Zeta Makeba Trust, which she set up when she was still alive, to protect her legacy and to provide for her descendants as a vehicle to make sure that her works would be protected. They're the ones who then have, obviously, ownership of her legacy.
Well, in the final analysis, it would be a strange thing to have somebody totally a stranger to a particular family, and a family, an iconic family like this one, who the family would have nothing to claim, would have no right to celebrate this particular individual. So for us, we have, without getting into the merits of the case itself, we have satisfied ourselves that over and above what is being said, her last word has to be, respected, because she did that, and we feel it's unfair because here the people who can't defend themselves and against a Goliath with all the support, including in the media space, as it were. And we thought that, no, we've got to, without any apology to anyone, we've got to enter this fray and take a stance for the artist herself and the family and the nation.
I asked it because of exactly that concern. It's something that you have championed in recent months. And from what I understand it, this was a trust that Makeba set up when she was still alive to avoid precisely the kind of thing you want to deal with. She wanted to separate the legal entity from her family so that the business affairs could continue and her family could be beneficiaries. Well, if anything, one might argue it's exactly the kind of model that should be pursued in future cases like this?
That's the slant of the media. I'm saying to you that we have said, wouldn't have, if the situation was at that point where you are, we wouldn't have involved ourselves. But we know
surely,
that
but you accept that this was a trust that was set up when she was alive. She was the director of the company.
Yes, initially. But before she died, she had to say what should happen. And we are saying that we get into this situation because we know that it's not necessarily, people change their minds whilst they are alive. You may have,
but the trust wasn't dissolved when she was alive. If anything, in fact, some of those family members who are taking action now try to take action then precisely because she didn't want them to be involved in the running of the affairs of the trust.
That's not the case. I'm saying that's not the case.
But that's a public record, Minister, though.
When the trust was formed and everything, it was at a particular time. But before she passed on, people, as I say, I don't want to get into the details, but people changed their minds. We have satisfied ourselves that yes, there was a trust. Yes, there was a particular view when the trust was formed, but through her experience with the trust and what she foresaw, like the period we're in, she then changed her mind.
But never dissolved the trust?
No, it never dissolved. She never dissolved the trust.
Wouldn't she have needed to do that if she had changed her mind?
No, not necessarily. You would confidentially get to someone legally to say that, well, this entity is here, but over and above this entity, this is what I want to see happening. So over and above the entity, she had her last word. And it's that last word of hers which has drawn us in. But as we speak now, there's been a court application. As I say, I wouldn't want to get into the detail, but we are satisfied and we have made a judgment call on the matter. In the final analysis, we do not want this perpetuation of artists who have to be owned even after death by individuals who have nothing to do with them.
Is there a wider conversation, a wider dialogue that needs to be had, perhaps facilitated by yourselves, with all stakeholders, with artists, with intellectual property lawyers, around how these kinds of matters may be resolved? How particularly, of course, artists who are concerned about infighting perhaps within family members, that kind of thing. Is there a model that needs to be formulated to make sure that this kind of situation doesn't happen again?
For the past 3 years, we've been reviewing the white paper on arts and culture. And one of the things we've been conversing with the artists is precisely that. And it's that conversation which has led us now to a situation where Parliament is going to be deliberating on the white paper itself, meaning that we've passed that point because we've seen those gaps and we are about to close them so that this thing doesn't happen. Because if you see, individual artists from time to time will raise issues whilst they are still alive, and others after their death, that they would say these things. Now they need protection, and they need legal protection.
So now while we're here, let's perhaps change the subject somewhat and talk me through the process you've been undergoing in terms of amending or renaming particular institutions. I know, of course, the latest flare-up has been around Cape Town International Airport. Where are we on that process?
Well, we are right on track. Firstly, let me thank South Africans who, in their thousands, participated in this process, because the process is simple, especially as it relates to the airport's name changes. Because airport reports to the Minister of Transport, so the ministry had to initiate consultation process through AXA, which they did, and they did a good job at that, because one of the requirements is that there has to be consultation when you want to change the names. You consult with the public, you consult with the families whose name you are going to be using for that. So the process is now at the level of the geographic name change in provinces, the committee in provinces, which are then going to look at the matter and make an application to South African National Geographical Name Council. Now the council, after looking at all the requirements and everything, then they will recommend to the Minister of Arts and Culture, who will then make a determination on which name should be taken. Of course, taking into account, guided by the guidelines through the Act, 1998 Act.
So at this stage, for example, we are nowhere near a name change, or at least a finalization, say, of Cape Town International Airport, because that's been the most contentious one that most people no doubt want to know as soon as you can announce it.
Well, they would know, because the cut-off date for consultation process was the 6th of June. So that date passed.
So how soon can we expect a decision?
Well, in the next, if there is no, it will depend. If there is no legal challenge in the process, the entire thing would be done within 4 months, and that includes gazetting of the name itself through Parliament and so on, so that it's official.
It's a bit of a hot potato, though, in so many ways, because of course you have to look at arts and culture, you've got to look at history, you've got to look at the politics and all the submissions in all the ways that you've outlined. But at the same time, some of these institutions are being used as, you could call it, a political point-scoring exercise by various sources, various sides. How do you navigate that minefield and come out with an outcome that's going to please most people?
Well, let me say firstly, the standardization of names is internationally accepted practice. The United Nations actually accept the sovereignty of countries to name objects and so on. It's not really a major problem for us, because look, we are at the tail end of everything else. And in any event, there will be contestations with names. If you want to change the name, and the name was there before, ideologically, people would, it's an interesting process to observe, especially when people are going to follow it to the latter. There are many of such processes which reach the point of the Minister of Arts and Culture, and they're taken back for the restart of the process. But if they've been followed up to the latter, it's part of a broader conversation about our cultural landscape.
But it can't be all things to all people. Minister, thank you very much for joining us this evening. That was, of course, the Minister of Arts and Culture, Nathi Mthethwa, with us in studio.